and then I just wanted to kind of sneak in real quick because I know Wendy's probably trying to leave in the next 10 minutes. The November, was it November 10th? Did November 10th work for you, Wendy?
I put it down.
Which was a Monday?
Yeah.
Okay, we haven't confirmed with Mary, but I think did everyone else in the room, I thought November 10th.
I think she was okay with.
So should we maybe just kind of set November 10th at 8:30?
And we'll be able to, my hope on that is in the October 20 and 21st, we might need to start that process, and if our friends from DESI could ask today, before you go back at our next date after the initial reserve, if they could ask if November 10th is a possibility, we would appreciate that.
Perfect. So I just didn't want to forget, and then we also had said we will keep the October 20 and 21st, but we said we would move to 8:30 start time. So that will, so then you're looking at the options tomorrow.
And we'll get some communication out to the whole group about it.
And we did not decide on a December date.
No, and do you want to wait till October to do that? Or do we need to do it today?
I think we
I can
may,
look at it.
because I think that people's schedules are gonna be.
Do we have does anybody want to throw a tentative one out there?
What were the dates you had open, like first and second?
First or second, really.
Because our Monday, Tuesday is better for people than the
Yeah.
end of the week. So I think Monday
Which
is
would be 3
December
weeks.
1st, Tuesday is December 2nd.
That'd be 3 weeks from November 1.
Let's try to keep that in mind and
Do you want to have it as a tentative?
So maybe December 1st, a Monday, that's better.
I would rather not. Yeah, I'd rather do it.
Like a Monday instead of Tuesday.
The first.
Okay, so maybe December 1st then would be our next date.
And we'll definitely say that
We
as
can-
a tentative.
Tentative, but we can maybe go ahead and have them reserve a room because.
Are we doing 1 day or 2?
I think in December one's
I think one.
I'm with you in December, so.
really anytime.
So do you mind asking for room reservations for us? It's Monday, December 1st, and then Monday, November 10th. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And then I'll post it in sunshine and all of that.
Is there a possibility they can't help us in the room, or we need to look for another store? Is there a possibility that you can't?
They will
Let us
ask
know.
initially and then,
Okay.
Yeah, if they
We can
can,
confirm, we'll see.
yeah, if they can, I'm pretty sure,
Okay.
yeah, Steve, if they can't, then let me know and I'll beg it.
we'll find a place, I'm sure.
So,
So the world history language was something that we felt that it was pretty strong, pretty good, right?
yeah.
One of the things you and I can do with Rome or other societies to say, okay, so we have a republic or democracy, but it doesn't say, they change it, you know, we go from a republic to an empire, you know, so that's an example of, you know, just noticing and breaking apart, so it looks like this, and now it changes to this, and just sort of tracing that.
And then do we?
and that is, and maybe this is too off, but that is a tendency that, same thing happened with Athens, that started out as a democracy rather than a republic, and still went to empire.
Okay, I'm gonna add, and I'm gonna be a stickler about this, because I just think that's what we oftentimes miss with kids, is it says analyze changes in democracy and republics over time to do what? You need to add that. We need to go back to the original intent.
How those responsibilities degrade or change, or
Or how does change in
how do people's
If you
perception?
change it good, or if you bad,
impact, the rights and responsibilities of citizens and governments? Or?
Yeah, I think that today, is it really about, because we're talking about change over time, continuity and change, or is it just into, I'm just throwing it out, so to,
People's awareness of their rights and responsibilities change over time.
it's, okay, let's go back, let me look at the other document. I think you're on to the rights and responsibilities part, I think, that we need to get in there.
Because that would be our thread across.
We could say, analyze changes in the government and citizens' responsibilities in democracies.
Okay, so looking,
Changes in the rights and responsibilities.
People's understanding of the changes.
okay, say it again.
Analyze changes in governments and citizens' responsibilities
Rights and responsibilities.
in republics and democracy and republics.
To do what? To do what again? It's still missing the to do what. You know what I mean? You don't know what I mean?
Yeah.
To the bigger idea.
Um,
And I think,
So we
To
want them-
understand how their perceptions of their rights and responsibilities change over time.
Or their actual rights.
Yeah, so we have democracies and republics over a period of time. So multiple government systems over time periods. We've been in this thread looking at responsibilities between governments and citizens, and we're saying, if we look at how a government system is changing over time, are we asking them, analyze how that government system is changing over time to impact the rights and responsibilities?
Oh,
How it affects them,
Responsibilities of
or is it,
citizens change in democracy.
Or are we wanting them to look at something a little different now, because now we're in high school?
Well, the difference is now we're noticing that.
So we're talking about ninth grade responsibility.
Well, it's not
It could be
really,
nice.
world history.
So it will
You're in
happen
world history now.
Right.
sometime between 9, 10, 11, and 12th grade. They will take that course.
So we say analyze how changes in democracy and republics.
we've now upped it. That's what they're doing in 8th grade. That's what they're doing in 7th grade, really. In some ways.
Yeah, I mean, because that is a change. The 8th grade level is a change over time. You don't put over time, but the change has to.
It's the cause and effects, yeah, but, so maybe we need to change, this may need to become,
Maybe that's too difficult to think for 8th grade.
no, I don't think it's too
Oh, okay.
difficult. I think we need to up the high school a little bit of what they're doing, because we.
You mean from 7?
The thing is, the rights and responsibilities remain the same, but the people's attention to them slips during the change to empire. How do you work that together in a short sentence?
What we want to do is ask them to be more, think more deeply about these changes in democracy and republics than we did last time.
Or are we differentiating? Is that using the language of the document here? So that's in the analysis piece, so we're differentiating between a time frame here and a time frame there.
Why, I guess, ultimately, in high school, why do we want them to look at it's really the evolution of democracy and republic over time, and ultimately, we want to do it so that we can look at how that is impacting the world today.
Maybe this is where we bring in Mary's idea of impacting social and cultural organizational peoples. Like, as I change my government systems, society changes. What is society? Just, you know,
Isn't
Yeah,
that
that'd
the
be good.
culture?
That's a
Like,
great
under
wrap
government?
up for your over time, you know.
You see what I mean?
well, and that may be because we have a whole culture column.
Yeah, but I think that might go in the culture column. That's funny, culture
I was just gonna say,
column.
that's like, I like a subset of everything, please. You can go on, Wendy.
I think it's this.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
In the morning, we were like,
I know.
I want to know who's calling.
I will email you guys all that.
Here's the difference, I think, between the 7th grade one and this one. The 7th
Yeah.
grade is they're actually explaining how rights and responsibilities impact governmental structures. Now we're analyzing governmental structures of democracy and republic to determine how that has impacted
People.
Yeah.
The rights and responsibilities
Mhm.
of governments.
Right. So it's to determine the rights and responsibilities that governments and citizens accept
Mhm.
to participate in. It's that same ending in there.
Yeah.
Would you
I mean, that's
agree?
okay, I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
there's almost a double shot of the same idea.
But we've also made it more
across-
complicated, we are now acknowledging that there are multiple forms of democracy,
Mhm.
so that I have direct because it's saying democracy versus republic, like that is more complicated. We're asking them to look at those systems over time, which is more complicated, and now we're looking at something kind of, I mean, a government system is really kind of big-ish to a kid, and we're asking them, take that system and apply it to a person. So I
Right.
think that is more appropriate.
Okay,
And I think that is a progression.
I do too.
Even though our language is almost identical, I think it's okay.
But it
But I-
provides that broad
Right. I'll
understanding.
read it.
Yeah.
Okay, it says, analyze changes in democracy and republics over time to determine the responsibilities that governments and citizens accept to participate in a republic. So it's going back to that bigger idea. Yeah. But you're looking at over time. So I think it's fine.
I like to find a sentence
I know.
that ties up and
To
it
do,
tells you
I know.
what they know, what they.
It makes
Yeah,
it,
that
It
is this progression.
that's a part I think that sometimes, I think when you were giving your example earlier about, and even dealing with your kids and what they're doing, without that, the why. So why are they doing this? That's, in that absence, that's where things fall down. And so, I'll probably say a lot. To do what? So you're like, what should we see kids doing? So then if they came home and you looked at it, you're like, oh, I know why they're doing this.
It's hard to say without seeing it. Is determine, do you think that fits best there? Is another word that might, that might give more openings into what's going on there than determine?
In the document here, Dan, on the cognitive processes under attributing, it uses determine, and organizing it uses determine under analyze. So it's actually staying in alignment with our progression of the cognitive process.
No, it's worse problem than that. I've got about 20 tabs.
It's
open.
open.
I took off the.
So determining is, I think, an appropriate word that I
It just
think
keeps the pyramid structure.
Does it, you got it open there?
as they go up the levels, we can understand organization.
So I'm gonna
Uses
say,
determine elements that determine what you buy. So we're determining over time how democracy is back to.
So are we using determine as to determine what's going on, or that these things determine?
Okay, they're breaking apart democracy and republics of the past going up to today. To see the rights and responsibilities that governments and citizens are taking that allow us to participate in a republic today, basically. It's actually informing us, or it's actually looking at how did we get to this point, how are we stronger at it, how are we, I mean, there's all kinds of ways you could look at that, but ultimately it's breaking apart those parts and looking at them over time to look at how it impacts governments and citizens' action today in a republic. Make sense? You want to look at it? Absolutely. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm not a either, so I apologize that I can't.
it'll be so much easier to
Yeah, so I told you.
For me, again, I'll say again, I'm not the expert in the room also, when I'm asking questions, I'm asking from the parents, like the parents in the room, I think, But when I hear what's being said, I think,
To be.
what?
I was hearing it without
a little
the
bit,
two.
you know?
Sometimes we use fancy language.
Two
Right.
determined, yeah, I think
Is
it's,
it good?
that's good.
So when she's reading and she says impact, to me, there are already duties that are clearly lined out for citizens, like the voting and, you know, you've got, just your basic, you know, your local government duties and then grows and then your state and, you know, so on and so forth. So when we say, how does it impact? I mean, like, I like a lot of the words using, and I think I like that one, but I'm kind of going, is that, you know, because you're saying cognitively, when we're progressing in that language, we're going to analysis in seventh grade versus, so when I say, well, what does this do? And you know, it's very dumbed down language
Well, we're back.
to the government or,
We're back to like that world history framework, that world history context with this class, so when students are taking world history. We want to keep this concept of your rights and responsibilities as a citizen alive,
okay,
and we want to make sure that,
Yes, continue.
as we apply the idea in different contexts, I hope it solidifies the students' understanding of it. So we continually come back to where are we, but we also have to look at, so if we're looking at Britain or other countries, that comparison probably is a good thinking process to help us really make that stick for us. So here's our rights and responsibilities, and over here, let's compare that, and as we look at that, and how it changes and how it shifts. Those are good lessons for us too, to make sure that we don't lose those rights and responsibilities. So
Or the lack thereof in other countries or other time periods, that doesn't know it exists.
Yeah, change over time, so that means there will be certain times where citizens don't have rights. And the defined responsibility of the government is gonna be different from defined responsibilities of our government that students would have had.
And we're still on one about documents. So I mean, that's what we have to come back to as well, is there, so we can analyze that.
right, and it's hard sometimes when we think in broad spectrum, how to keep that from becoming, you know, very tempting to,
Yeah.
you know.
We connect everything to the timeline of history, and we try to connect these ideas and make them relevant, and then I think that we get a lot more, we'll feel a lot better.
So, are we ready to look at the history?
Is that, I mean, you have,
We still have Oh, American history, I see. I heard you wrong, never mind, forget I said that.
US history, sorry.
but we've got more concepts, don't we? In world history?
I've kind of just been going across this one line.
Yeah,
all
grade
the way
level.
across.
So you meant course, American history, not history strand.
So,
It just comes back to the left there.
Yeah. I have on anything like this.
I'm following.
Okay, so we're just doing the A.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I
We're
just
just doing
I
that.
just took it, wait, no.
Yeah, we're following down our chart, right?
when we talk about traveling and shaping our country, and I'm hearing you say we've done a world history on
Now, U.S. history now is about our opportunity to go back with probably much more mature kids, and we're doing something in American history now with this strand.
That's here with this, and it provides some of the documents.
Did you kind of lose the
As it's stated, it says analyze the changing roles of government in the context of the historical period being studied. 1, philosophy, 2, limits, 3, duties, 4, checks and balances, 5, separation of powers, and 6, federalism.
It still goes back to responsibilities because it's looking
I don't have that. You have.
Was it
How did we get switched over to this?
Okay, underneath here.
Right.
Close.
It goes a little
Going
odd
down.
because we changed to go world history American.
Yeah. Gotcha.
It's to determine these roles are filling out, there are these things.
We're using the term philosophy, limits, duties, check and balances, separation of powers, and analyze the changing role of government.
Are we doing that, or are we doing the changing? Because right now, the way it reads is, in relation to, it's really analyzing the changing levels of government in relation to the philosophy, limits, duties, checks and balances, blah, 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 in the context of this historical period, to determine the responsibilities of governments and business accept and participate in the public. That's it.
Yeah.
That's
Makes
what,
sense?
yeah, they just,
All right, let me
they're
put
putting
this
this
here and then we'll,
and that will probably, we'll use that same structure in government once we get it hashed out, because
I can keep as many things in common there as we can to help the practitioner. That is,
Here, do you want?
That's why I'm here. Have to do it on my laptop.
You're going to leave in the center.
okay.
But I'll put it in there.
I don't know,
If you sit in the future,
Okay.
other teachers in the room, but all of these objectives, let's say in the historical context of in the historical period being studied, it would make a whole lot more sense to build this into specific historical periods, you know, to notice rather than saying you should do this always.
when we're lining it up across, the way that we're restructuring it, will the historical periods become evident at that point?
So you line up the history.
Will it, or do you not?
I don't know, is that too far to the curricular side?
Kind of.
You know, because I would like these to be, I feel like our mission needs to keep these as not tying specifically to a time frame, but to make them where you can look at each component within which, if it works, whichever.
Well, and you know why? Because schools have different breakpoints for 8th grade year. Freshman, a lot of schools will break that differently. Like, do you go to Reconstruction, do you go to the Civil War, do you stop it? You know, like, and world history is the same way. Schools break that. You know, do you start at the beginning and in middle school go through the classics, Renaissance, and much later? I mean, so you're right. We have to be careful about that.
I think that would be a step that we don't have to necessarily, unless you feel it's hard to write the standard without having historical specific
I think
findings.
it's okay. I think we'll see, but I think flipping the verbiage to what it actually means will make it cleaner.
There's just a lot of, this is the problem we can speak about between now and next time is there's a lot of these objectives that just say, when you do this class, do this.
All the time.
All the time. And then when you get that, it's like, okay, so how do I make that relevant to different parts of history so I actually do it? Because if I can't make it relevant, then it never really gets done. And so how can we say in different periods of history about how this applies? And other objectives too.
But what we've done is by making it progressively, actually, I think now more complex as we move through the grade system, it becomes less important where they do it, as long as kids are getting to that top level. You know, because if we're actually getting down to, I put that on my sheet, to the bottom, you know, where they're actually creating and evaluating. I mean, if you do that here, then you can do that here and here, you know, so hopefully.
And that's my question, excuse my naivety here, but we're doing standards. Will there be, is there going to be another, something that supports this like a GOE or a COE?
That's where we're writing.
Right, that's what this is.
I think these are
Okay,
the.
so I want to make sure I'm clarifying too, that
These are the course expectations for the U.S. history book.
Do we want to take a crack at trying to split apart that, you know, that's a large expectation. Do we wanna try to figure out splitting that into, picking up on Jessica's phrase, philosophy to do what, to understand limits to do what? Do we wanna try and break these apart at all? Instead of keeping them as one lump?
This, you want me to tell you how I wrote it?
Yeah, let's hear
Read
it.
Well, how I took all that we said and put it together. So right now, the tricky part is it's wordy, so you're right. Analyze the changing roles of government in relation to philosophy, limits, duties, checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism in the context of the historical period being studied, to determine the responsibilities that governments and citizens accept to participate in a republic. So the part that's wordy is with the historical context and what, so we can revisit this, but we have the core of what we were saying we wanted to condense, refine, and pull it out. We can, but now at least the do part is consistent and parallel to the other grade levels. So should we put it there, Jamie, that like no, that's okay, but I didn't know how you were doing it, but that one we need to maybe revisit for some
I have a question on,
grammar
for that, for point one, philosophy as being a item on the tick list, whereas all those items on the tick list are parts of the philosophy that you're examining.
When they say philosophy in that context is going back to, it's really looking at,
Political
going back to
philosophy?
early forms of, it's those people and those documents and the ancient world and looking at earlier civilizations and their forms of democracy that actually contributed to why we did the way we did it. It's also looking at our founders and some of the pieces that they provided, so, and why, how that contributed to the limits that we set, the duties that we set within our government, the actual federalism, the form of federalism that we decided. So that's really what, would you guys agree, when we say philosophy, that that's what that means?
Big term, like it lets you go all back to like Plato's Republic,
Right.
or it gives you
Right.
Yeah.
But it's,
That's what that means.
And so then the nice
I know
part is,
I know philosophy means pretty thoroughly inside and out.
No, I didn't, oh,
No, I wasn't taking that one.
okay,
I'm
good,
just-
so like I didn't mean that.
No,
but that one is weird in that list of other items. Don't
yeah,
you agree?
it's kind of like, and now let's discuss the relationship between fingernails and toes and people, and, wait, what, you're examining a person here, and here's the parts, it just seems, if someone clicks on what philosophy actually is, and they see that in the list, it's kind of like, what?
Yeah, we're gonna run into a lot, you can notice a lot of standards that are lists like this,
Yeah.
that are applied to, you just, do these things, and, this is a good exercise in maybe how we might go about the most meaningful.
Is it being used more as a kind of reference back to historical periods, or?
Do you mean the itemized listing that we have?
Yeah.
I think it's a way to work in, really explicit, expectations, where you're saying students will understand checks and balances, they will understand separation of powers, they will understand political philosophy, and you're trying to put in very concrete expectations for what that looks like. For a lot of reasons, one, I think we agree that all those are really important if you're trying to, analyze these things in the context of U.S. history. But also, I think one of the reasons historically that these little subcategories were added is because teachers were asking for more clarification on what are potential assessment items. And so I think a lot of these lists are trying to provide some clarification of what is a potential assessment item. It is my guess. I mean, and we can maybe talk about what we feel about the itemized listings.
Maybe I'm looking at it with too much tied in my own head between two philosophies, but when I looked at this, I would see, okay, discuss limits, duties, checks and balances, separation of power, federalism through an Aristotelian perspective or through a Machiavellian perspective, or it's kind of like, why are you trying to make that part of the lists of things that make it up? It just doesn't make sense for me.
Sorry,
That's the such as that I was referring to.
hello. They asked if we would come to them. I said, sure, the two would work, and I said, sure, where are you? But I wasn't responding, so I kept texting, hello, 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 so I didn't hear anything you said. So I was like, oh, thanks for ignoring them. Okay.
I'm sticking on it, and maybe, because I'm not thinking of it with the idea of how you're presenting that in class, but that limits, duties, checks and balances, separations of powers are things that have different meanings and applications through different types of philosophy. And putting philosophy in that list with them is kind of, it's a category error, kind of what's going on here, kind of thing.
I think you're interpreting, can I just make sure?
Yeah.
We have all these different political philosophies.
Right.
Each political philosophy would present a different idea of what limits,
Yes.
of what checks and balances, of what separation of powers.
That's what
So the question is, are we asking to look at various philosophies to understand these rights? And these are really like responsibilities that we're accepting. So how do the different philosophies explain the acceptance of rights? Or do we want to just look at different acceptance of rights and remove that idea of philosophies in this place? One or the other, probably.
If it makes sense in a classroom at this, are we looking at 10th grade here?
It could be any
Right in
grade,
there.
9, 10, 11, 12, it's
High
usually
school
9
American history.
For me, it would make more sense that 2 through 6 are bullet points under philosophy, and then you can see that as, okay, how did someone from, you know, whether we're talking Aristotle, Cato, Machiavelli, Hume, all these people have completely different ideas, maybe use the same terms, but with way different ways and meanings that they take from those terms.
To give you an idea of how a teacher would take this right now, because this is U.S. history, in different times of American history, leaders have assumed different amounts of power. For instance, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln took upon himself to do specific things that extended the limits, that changed the limits of a president, what he can do. For instance, putting people in jail because we're in wartime, right? And so that's something that people talk about, is how do different leaders expand the power and their limits. In Reconstruction, we're going to impeach a president, and so that's an example to talk about checks and balances. And so in different periods in American history, that's why the historical period being studied thing is in there, so that we can talk about these governmental principles and how they look different in different parts of American history. Today, we have presidents that have a whole lot more power than they did 100 years ago. And so we look at these in light of those kind of changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's sort of what we're currently doing with this standard.
And I think you're expressing in fact what I'm saying, that you're looking at that, okay, under the ideas that were motivating Lincoln in this period, these things came out in this fashion. Under colonial times, it came out differently. Providence, Rhode Island is a completely different view of the same things than in Boston.
So could we somehow pull that word philosophy
up, or
And put it into the
STEM
narrative,
question?
yeah, and not necessarily a bullet point.
Yeah.
So is it changing rules of governmental philosophy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Call
pull
me
it,
Captain Burger.
and because you're pulling it then out of the list and identifying it
Yes.
as the underlying source, which,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry that
So you're getting
rid of the word philosophy?
No, we're putting it back up so that it
I know,
is.
thank you.
I'm like, no, you're not saying.
No, that's not something I would ever do.
Actually, we're enhancing.
Or maybe
Yeah.
We're not making it.
I think we're putting it where it belongs,
Okay.
where it's an all-encompassing term.
It's really analyzing.
Yeah, up into the bottom.
Right, it makes a lot more sense to start there.
So in relation to limits, duties, checks and balances, right?
Okay,
And it kind of.
I
We fixed
We don't really need to
We've
revisit
done
it.
this, and what we've done is we've prioritized. I think maybe, could we, because we'll have to email Wendy the track change, and
Right.
we can take a picture of this and email Wendy this as well, and that way,
Do you want me to know which, do you want me to do this?
once you spell it right, I think so that.
It's
It's hard to see in the track change, and like misspelling, I know.
Rather than the governing,
Philosophy behind it.
the philosophy behind all those items, yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Which
think
that was like,
Good work.
that's just-
Thank you, man. Now, help us kind of wrap our head around.
okay, if we can get government done, we would have finished one complete progression of one part of.
We're meeting in,
So we're just saying, we've got.
It'll feel really good because it all road done, like on the way.
And maybe I'm, not on topic here, but in our absence, we're going to be examining other documents. So while we're working together, we're going to be working on and fine-tuning the standards, getting them together. So today we're going to have this one line. Then in our absence, we're going to be reading and then bringing those new resources.
So maybe we
To
should.
do the same thing.
Yeah,
for-
that-
When we finish
That
government,
way,
And
then
we'll talk about
how we're
then
gonna-
we can like give ourselves some homework just so we read a little bit.
Let's get to the
And then-
woo-woo point.
Yeah, but let's.
right.
Government,
Okay.
applying the following principles to upper public, to historical and contemporary issues. And then it starts off checks and balances, separation of powers.
Okay, this is where I think we get to the evaluate part.
I would say the same thing.
And if you can just insert the letter A for public, I'd be just thrilled.
Oh, okay, well,
That
yeah.
just drives me nuts.
Okay, so let's think about that.
So I have a question, Simon. Whenever we're looking at this different groups here, you have U.S. history, government, these subtitles here, and we have U.S. history, and we have these words, and then we come over here to government, and it's a little more specific on logistically how it works. Is that how we say that, or how we say that? Because are these separate classes, or are these things that will be? Yeah, 'cause to me that's nonsense. I just think it's crazy.
No, we're studying or talking about the same things in both classes, but they may take a little different perspective.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so I was like, explain that to me, coming from teachers. How do you go, well, we can only talk about this because this is what we're dealing with. You'll deal with that in your, I mean, what, give me, do you have an example of something come to mind when I say
in
that?
that class, you have to have, one of the graduation requirements is that you pass a constitution exam. So you may be looking a little more in depth at the U.S. Constitution in your government class. You would address it, look at it, talk about it, know the in the history class, but maybe not go as in depth over all of the parts of the Constitution.
Okay, because
So the government class might be quizzing on the articles of, well, I guess ours.
I'm
the
sure
five,
someone
six
has a better
articles
example.
through that. But in the history class, you're going through how they developed, came together, what brought them to the convention in Philadelphia, to put together the,
yeah, it's sad though, we go to all this trouble like 20 years later, just forget. Sorry.
Yeah.
We
You can look up. And so,
It's not access to information, it's helping students interpret what they
Yeah.
Okay.
They can find.
I mean, don't you think that's kind of crazy though, like to have them separated? I mean, don't you think they should be together? I mean, maybe not. I mean, I understand because government's not just U.S. government. So I guess that means when we talk about, we have governments and they talk about all kinds of government. So I guess I can understand why that.
Well, and it's all about degrees of specificity, and when your actual school district sits down and writes courses, we always do that in all subs. So we're gonna write all of our social studies together. So we're gonna sit down and hash out, obviously U.S. history, there becomes a point in world history where there is overlap, because the U.S. in second semester comes to exist, in world history. So we talk about pretty clearly, we don't erase the U.S. out of world history, but we're gonna talk about, where is there overlap? We're gonna build on what the kids have already learned in their prior coursework. We're gonna shift emphasis, where we are gonna talk about World War II in both courses, but our emphasis in World War II and a world history course is gonna be really different than our emphasis of World War II in a U.S. history course. Well, so it doesn't negate or always duplicate, or it shouldn't. It shouldn't be just redundant duplication. In the government course, you have a lot more time where you can actually look at the document, the Constitution itself, and you have a fantastic opportunity in government to look at how government works in real-time application.
I guess it just feels very fragmented when I look at it this way. It just seems fragmented, and I realize that that's not the real picture when you're down in the trenches, but
it is, and a teacher has to. I had a biology teacher once who clipped a whole bunch of things for me. He had us come in and analyze. We're going to analyze this frog, and we dissected the frog and took it all apart and did all the things we had to do for class. And then he said, "Okay, now I want you all put the pieces back together and put it over here and let them play." I'm like, what? That's what you do when we study things. When you analyze it, you kill it. It's dead. You have to remember that this frog lives as a whole, all the parts. You analyze it, break it apart, let them separate in your head, dead, gone. It means nothing anymore. You have to keep the understanding of it all together as a living thing, a one. Oh,
That would be powerful.
stuck with me forever.
You have, and that's that to do what?
Yes.
So you just leave it dead, and you just analyze, that's
It's
exactly
important to
what
understand
it
that here's the heart, and this is what it is, and connects all that. But if you think of that as just a piece, you killed the whole thing.
She would mention something on our,
The government one.
cognitive table. Where did you say that was a value?
Evaluate, you're moving down. So now, what we have to decide though is when we look at that, if you look at that piece, that means that we're looking historically and today. We're detecting inconsistencies or fallacies or effectiveness or ineffectiveness within our actions or within the structure that have occurred over time. So we have to figure out how we word that to do that.
One thing I thought about was how effective are these protections in protecting people's rights and responsibilities?
Evaluate the effectiveness of,
That's what I think too.
evaluate the effectiveness of in protecting the rights of
So
citizens.
it's in the principles of the republic.
Yeah. So for instance, federalism is a protection built into the Constitution to give states, certain responsibilities and central government responsibilities. But over time those are blurred, and so federalism doesn't look like it used to. So that's just one of those. Separation of powers has changed over time.
That's good. So evaluating the effectiveness
So
of.
how effective are checks and balances of protecting people's rights and responsibilities? And that's a good way to remember many of those things.
Are you ready?
That's good.
This is what I heard. Evaluate the effectiveness of the principles of a republic, we can say in the United States, of the republic in the United States, of the republic, doesn't matter. And then it has that list, checks and balances, separation of powers, yada, yada, yada. In protecting the rights and responsibilities of the citizens who participate in the republic.
Yeah, that's great.
Or put in a republic, because that's the way it's been.
Yeah.
There's so much.
That is so good.
Did you, all right,
Can you do it one more time?
Yeah.
evaluate the effectiveness of the principles of a republic. I'll start over. I needed to evaluate the effectiveness of the principles of a republic. Checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, dun, dun, dun. In protecting the rights and responsibilities of the citizens who participate in a republic.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so we,
One-
I'm
one-
gonna say evaluate
Okay.
effectiveness.
One quibble that really probably should be left on it, but
No, it
that
doesn't-
my own little, and it's not what you said, I think you put that together well, but that checks and balances are the thing that made separation of powers work. So I've always riled a little bit when they're listed as separate things, because that was Madison and the guys kind of, oh, yeah, Montesquieu's got kind of a good idea, but it doesn't work unless you have this overlap. So we don't have separation. We have overlapping powers, which the checks and balances require and make it work. That's beyond what we're.
From someone who's taught a very low-level government course,
Yeah.
it's nice for students to have both of those sets of languages in their vocabulary. But I
I know,
absolutely agree
I've
with
tried to
what
explain it a few
I
times, I know what you're
absolutely
saying.
agree with what you just said, so, I mean, as a group, I don't really have strong emotion either way, other than it's, I think.
One of the things
useful
too,
to
as
have.
you're writing, when we are, again, the broad brush, those will be terms, and unfortunately, those will be terms that they will bump up against again in their lives. So we need to, I think, keep that language.
I think the way you have that worded is good.
Could you restate that one more time, Julie, would like to hear the final?
Well, I heard you state it, and I wanted to be sure I was putting it in the right context in the graph, what it was exactly we're looking at and changing for what grade level, because I'm a little lost again on the grade level.
It's a government course, and it's for high school, it's
And
not
this is
grade
not
school.
grade, okay, that's why I'm getting
Yeah,
lost.
it's a
I keep thinking I'm looking for ninth grade, and it's like, no, okay.
Whoever that's.
But feel free to share them again,
Yeah,
okay, it's brilliant, so let's hear it.
Evaluate the effectiveness of the principles of a republic. Checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, representation, property sovereignty, due process of law, judicial review, in protecting the rights and responsibilities of the citizens who participate in a republic.
I think that's it.
Level of,
I really want to go across now. I think that's gonna be it.
All right, so do you want me to be identifying
You're
sixth
reading?
grade? Hold on.
no, she's gonna get really loud here.
No, because I'm all about the,
That's what you do.
this is, okay, so hang on, let me just close that one out. I knew that was gonna happen, I'm like, I'm gonna close it, and someone's gonna say, can we look back at? So hang on.
So I'm just excited to hear all
Oh, no.
I think we hit the Workgroup point.
Yeah, and then let's totally go out on a hangout coach just to sign homework,
Yeah.
fiddle for 5 minutes and go together.
Will we be in a different room? I was just going to let Mary know where.
500.
Yeah.
500.
It is bigger, or it has more seating.
Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, grade 6, they're identifying responsibilities that governments and citizens accept to participate in the republic. 7th grade, they're explaining how the concept of government and responsibilities of citizens impacts the development of governmental systems. 8th grade, they're analyzing important principles within Declaration, blah, 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 to determine the responsibilities that governments and citizens accept. High school in world history, they're analyzing changes in democracy and republics over time to determine the responsibilities that governments and citizens accept to participate in a republic. U.S. history, they're analyzing the changing roles of governmental philosophy in relation to limits, duties, checks and balances, blah, 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 blah. in the context of the historical period being studied, to determine the responsibilities that governments and citizens accept to participate in a republic. And in government, they're evaluating the effectiveness of the principles of a republic in protecting the rights and responsibilities of the citizens who participate in a republic.
Yay! That's the word.
Yes?
Give me a woohoo.
Woohoo!
We have one.
But it's
Hey.
good.
It's one out. And much.
Right.
I've been talking to our colleagues around and they go, oh, this is a pretty
We're
good.
many in the league.
I think we're here for super curiosity.
And you know what, in my experience, working with social studies departments and groups, it's always a struggle. People are very passionate about what they believe. I commend everyone for their cooperative spirit. Today was, we got something done, so good work, everyone, thank you.
I'm going to send these two documents to everyone. Yes, I'm going to rename them. Right now they say, please social studies, but I put today's date. And then it says, please, they're two different documents. Please social studies, I put today's date. And then when we update them, I will rename it the new date.
So we can see the work and progression.
Alex and I talked about how, just as a sidebar earlier, because of the nature of this group, the fact that these two groups are separate, the elementary group from us, it would probably make a whole lot of sense to not have these in two documents at some point, but to
Right.
say 6 through 12,
Right.
whatever expectations.
Right, I agree.
Because I do think, sorry.
And as a practical matter, we might want to start looking at a template to start putting this stuff into that's fresh, that allows us to do that, so you don't go back to
What do we feel are, and that's, I think, yeah, we need to do that probably next time, with some type of template, or maybe somebody can create that in the interim, I don't know.
Right.
What?
I liked how this process worked today, kind of going through this all together.
I did too.
I wonder if we should, I don't know, how do you guys feel? Like, I'm hesitant to start digging through all these other curricular documents when we still don't have it. We only have one of 40.
I wouldn't worry about it, because as a group, we're collaborating over this, as we're going through that, and so,
Yeah.
you know, go ahead, look through some things, highlight some things,
Okay.
you know, like, and you can stick to this as the,
And we kind
main whatever,
Just
and then,
look through them for good ideas,
yeah,
things that
and
seem
then, and we
sensible, and we can.
yeah,
I would think, so, you know, do what we did a little bit individually, but then we'll definitely, you're gonna have to come back, so we have to vet it out as we go, but look at those word changes like you did today from
I just did it. I just sent it to everybody.
Probably evaluate, taking on the next step, maybe just look at principle two and see what our thoughts are.
Yeah, maybe look at two.
That's kind of what I thought, to come in with ideas so we can maybe get through two faster with our ideas. And if someone had a great thought, like there was something, you know, with that one part that you really had a deep sense of, I want to have this included.
And then that.
Yeah, and then we can go through that in two like this the next time, and hopefully, get on to the next one. The other supporting documents, I looked through the North Carolina one a little bit, and it will be a challenge
Yeah.
because it just, the principles are different,
Yeah.
scope and perspective.
So,
This is good.
yeah.
Oh, good.
So we've got more bullets in one, I guess. So maybe in the meantime, we'll finish reading one and thinking through like the other
Right.
1B or whatever, and then we'll look through two, and that would probably take at least a day.
Yeah.
And then we'll have only like, 700 more.
Yeah.
well, and I will remind you that yesterday there was a lot of time that was wasted time, and so effectively speaking, the time that we were able to accomplish that, we will probably be able to make better use of our time next time. So
Yeah,
it
and
will
we
be,
felt like the list is.
yeah,
Kind of rolled.
it will be a much better, all the time it was gone, this last portion that way, so.
you said you could bring up a projector next time, we can always take turns.
Just reminders, I repeat things for you as much as for anyone else, but that's October 20th and 21st, 8:30, let's just say 8:30 to 3. On the second day, maybe we can get out a little earlier, but 8:30 to 3.
For the second day, or the first day.
Yeah, 8:30 to 3.
If you're doing 3 the first day, or,
We're gonna go home on Monday morning. Are we just taking one day?
no,
Two, I'm not sure.
Both days, 8:30 to 3.
Oh, okay, okay.
I think,
Do you
in
want?
a day we could finish string one,
I think so.
after we started, we could start with the string two on the same day. Or,
That's what you do.
Yeah, I think once we kind of have, I mean, for me, I think just as a, not used to looking at these sorts of materials and graphs with the language in it. When you have the template, and then we're just gonna fill in the boxes, and once we kind of, it's gonna make it a lot easier. At least for me, hopefully I can have a computer that will maybe help.
Well,
But-
you can give us a workable. Awesome.
But I think that would be.
Thanks for volunteering on that,
I
Brian.
love templates.
Nice.
Well, you got it there and understood how to graph that in a pretty savvy way, so.
What am I forgetting that I need help remembering? Help me.
Room reservation.
I have an email address that I was given that I will,
And then I would say, maybe, I guess you'll have to be the one to confirm with us. You know what we do need, I mean, they said we have rooms on the 21st, I think, but we don't know that it's this room.
I think I've heard
Do
that.
we know that, or we,
They have not given us any room
okay.
numbers.
when I email Terry Longley, I will, ask that question.
Confirm to make sure, we're assuming the 21st is reserved. It's not.
It is reserved, we just, some of them in the Jefferson building and some of them are here.
Okay, so I would say, Steve, that's probably it.
From the side of providing our information and what we've accomplished over this 2-day period, it's our responsibility to share that out with the public.
My personal opinion is that
I think it's.
in my group, you know, that it's been a positive experience, and what I feel like needs to be
Yeah, but I
shared
don't know
out of
who to
respect for those that are here.
share that with.
Instead of using napkins, so.
I think
Yeah.
we're obligated to report the minutes to the Senate and the House. And I got the contact you have for the rooms and get you to direct. We have Dempsey's office, but we don't have the other side. And then what I believe is that, we have to announce all of our meetings, which hopefully they'll do that for us. And then as far as our minutes, I mean, we're obligated to submit them. And then sometimes it says if requested, we have to produce them. So I mean, you and Wendy then, I guess, probably would each want copies of our minutes, you know, that you're keeping in a file that you made, like, I don't know, something really big, like 6 through 12 or whatever, where, you know that if the request comes down, here's all of our minutes that we have produced, and as long as we don't shred them or delete files, then I think then we're compliant, if I understood the memo from this line correctly.
That is what I will do. I will ask Wendy to send me the information that she compiled during our work session.
And these videos will go up on the Disney website as well, that'll be part of Sunshine. Sunshine,
Sunshine, if we made it, is that a new?
I guess so,
word?
again.
I suppose we can, take a restroom break prior to going over to the other room.
Are we not gonna take our fund so we can leave from 500?
Yeah.
I think we can, I'm taking my stuff.
Yeah.
You can.
So, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Do we want to take that flip chart so that they can kind of get an idea of what we're doing, or?
Well, that might be a good point. Who wants to be our spokesperson over there to articulate where we are?